On this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, we are talking playoff possibilities in terms of learning. What are some things that Memphis can take from the runs of the Boston Celtics, the Dallas Mavericks, the Indiana Pacers? Am I going to have to eat my words with Tyrese Halliburton? Absolutely not. I'm most certainly not going to do that, killing the lead a little bit. But we're going to talk through lessons learned from current playoff successes for the Memphis Grizzlies. We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hope you had a wonderful weekend. Maybe you watched some golf. Maybe you watched some basketball. There were 2 big Game 7s on Sunday night, and hopefully you are happily joining us to start another week here on Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole. We have lots of fun things to talk about on this episode of the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe over on YouTube. Again, our YouTube success continues, Damichael. Big time things there. Thank you guys for hanging out with us and commenting and most importantly, subscribing there on YouTube, but liking and commenting on all that stuff. Obviously, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, it's all good. Wherever you get your podcasts, we are happy to have you here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, I've really enjoyed your solo show on Friday. Anytime you talk about Mike Conley,
that's your guy, yeah.
I just, and maybe later this week, depending on how things shake out for him in Minnesota, obviously that Game 7 and the energy coming out of Minnesota and all that sort of thing, maybe we can touch on a different angle of that later in the week. But, the fun part of this episode is going to be the teams, outside of that Denver-Minnesota series, because I feel like between Denver being the champions and the Timberwolves being a team that the Grizzlies have played recently in the playoffs, we know a lot from those two teams. And maybe there's something that we can still learn. But I thought to start off our Monday, and, we tweaked it a little bit going into the show, lessons that we can learn from the other current conference semifinalists, right? The folks that are in the conference finals now. We picked these 3, and it just turns out that these 3 are the ones that are advancing. The Celtics, the Mavericks, and the Pacers. And we're each going to take a different lesson. Yeah. And I'll start off with my lesson from the Boston Celtics, watching them. Aside from the obvious, there'll be people in the comments to Michael saying, "Oh yeah, have 2 of the top 10 players on the planet."
Yeah, really have 2 $300 million contracts on your roster. That'll do it.
That'll do it. I think that what I have learned from Boston, and it makes me excited about the Grizzlies' future, is that consistency can pay off, right? Yeah. Like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been there in Boston for a long time now. Al Horford left and then came back. Mm-hmm. There are key cogs to that machine. Peyton Pritchard has been there for a few years now. There are some key cogs to that machine, and they have refined around it, right? Whether it's a Kristaps Porzingis, a Drew Holiday. There have been moves on the periphery, and I don't want to disrespect Drew Holiday. He's very good. But the core is still the same, right? Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, the 2 J's as they're called.
Yeah, even Brad Stevens in a different role, but still.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for me, looking at the Boston Celtics and the success they've had, no disrespect to the Indiana Pacers, but it's Boston in 3 for me. And I'll touch more on that later on. The reality of this situation for Boston is that they've invested in 2 guys. They've grown together. They've grown up together. Things seem to be aligning for them now, the health of the Knicks leading to the Pacers being in this position. And, I think most rational basketball minds, maybe there's Indiana Pacers folks checking out the podcast here. Yeah. No disrespect, Boston's going to be a heavy favorite in that series. The stars are kind of aligning for the Celtics now to finally break through and make an NBA Finals. It's because of the guys that they've invested in and kept around, and obviously Memphis has the possibility to do the exact same thing.
Exactly. And so your lesson was pretty much consistency. And I think that's a powerful lesson because that's one that I've touched on from a different perspective in the past here. Joe, you remember when we were talking about the teams that made the Western Conference runs and whatnot. If you notice anything, consistency was a huge key in the Western Conference this year. You can make an argument that teams 5 through 8 were just as talented on paper as the teams that finished 1 through 4. But the difference was, the Mavs finished fifth, but the Mavs had consistency. Finally, last year we saw how terrible Luka and Kyrie pairing looked together, and we're gonna talk more about that, later on in the show. But the consistency that they added, the consistency of the Timberwolves, right? Remember the Timberwolves last year, the Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns thing looked terrible. We were talking about can't keep both, and now it looks like okay, this is something they can build on going forward, in the future. But the thing for me, Joe, I'm gonna go in a different perspective on this one. I'm gonna say offensive efficiency, and not just offensive efficiency. It's the way that they did it. So Boston this season, you know how many 3-pointers they averaged per game? 42. No other team in the NBA even averaged 40.
Yeah, that seems like a lot of threes.
In fact, the next closest was Sacramento at 39.3. The Grizzlies were fifth in the NBA in this, by the way, at 37.8.
Which is wild.
Yeah, because the Grizzlies don't have a lot of shooters.
Yeah, they're not particularly good at it. So everybody out there that says volume is what matters when it comes to three-point shooting clearly did not watch much Memphis Grizzlies basketball.
And that's why I say efficiency, because the Grizzlies already got half of it down, right? They're not scared to shoot it. They're top 5 in the NBA, 3-point attempts per game. Now the key is, we've heard Taylor Jenkins, right? The let it fly mentality. I remember going into the season before this one, and he was telling me even Steven Adams had the green light. And I remember I put that story out there, and people, Steven Adams is going to be shooting 3-pointers this year. But the point is, all these guys, whether we disagree with it, whether we like it or not, I've talked about Zion Williams being a better mid-range shooter, but then we see half of his shots are 3-point attempts. I remember Joe complaining about Xavier Tillman shooting corner 3-pointers and whatnot and things like that. So the point is, one thing that the Grizzlies can learn from Boston is, yes, you got the idea from the standpoint of get those 3-pointers up, prioritize guys who are more accurate. We see in Boston, you got Derek White, Drew Holiday, Jaylen Brown, I think struggled a little bit from 3 this year, but we know what Jaylen Brown is historically from 3-point range. Same thing, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser off the bench. All these guys are prolific enough 3-point shooters where no team, we saw it. Remember that game Golden State went into that game against the Celtics, and they tried to treat Jaylen Brown like he was Ben Simmons. So he's going to be the guy we lazy close out on. And Jaylen Brown, I think, posted on X after that game, like, I wish I could see this coverage every game, or more teams. I think he said more teams should try this coverage. So the point is, when I watched Boston this year, because it stood out, Joe, 42 3-point attempts per game. That's 3. Again, I got to reemphasize that. That's 3 more than anyone else. If you watch Boston play, everyone sees it. It's the first thing, team play. We got to take away the 3-point shot. It's easier said than done, and this is another part of it that Memphis can adopt. Because this is the difference. The reason Boston is able to get up 42 3-point attempts, look in the lineup. Derek White has dribble drive ability. Drew Holiday can take you off the dribble drive ability. Now, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis, all of them are comfortable dribbling the ball more than 2 times. If you look at the Grizzlies lineup, they're getting in that direction finally. Ja Morant, that's never been a problem. We know Jaren has comfortability in that area. Desmond Bane has shown over the last 2 years the steps he's taken. After for a while, he didn't showcase much of that. If your third guy is, if your wing is Marcus Smart, we know he has those capabilities as well. So they're going in that direction. The 5-man or 4, whoever that 5th starter will be, that we'll see if that player has some of the capabilities of those other guys. But they're moving in that direction, though. I just think that is the one thing that I've learned from watching the Boston Celtics that the Grizzlies could pick up on, is the fact that Boston has clearly, it's this under Mazzulla. This is a strategy that has changed. This was not a strategy that was popular under Brad Stevens with them. They have clearly emphasized getting up more 3-pointers than anybody in the entire NBA.
And that is efficiency that Memphis has to find somehow. Maybe it doesn't look exactly the same as the Celtics, but it most certainly needs to be a priority because the defense is going to be steady, right? That's Taylor Jenkins' MO. Finding ways, whether it's livening up the offense outside of the pick and roll, whether it's slashing, cutting, adding a three-point shooter in the offseason, a big that can help space the floor, whatever the case might be, there has to be something done to try to address that offensive issue. And I think that's a good one. How do you feel about the Boston Celtics? Let us know in the comments. What else do you think the Grizzlies can take from that squad? When we come back, we're going to be talking our rivals, technically, there in the Southwest Division, the Dallas Mavericks, something that we can take away from their run to the Western Conference Finals. Talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Yahoo. I'm very big on Yahoo, but not just Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination. That's yahoofinance.com. One more time, that's yahoofinance.com. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by Prize Picks. It's still possible for you to get in on the playoff action. Win up to 100 times your money over on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the basketball postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, the WNBA, baseball, all sorts of different entries today over on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. For example, Caitlin Clark setting the WNBA world on fire. Maybe not so much on the court, but in terms of the attention being brought to the league. And she had a pretty good game recently. Maybe you want to say Caitlin Clark's going to go for more than 30 points, and you want to couple that with a Luka Doncic snagging more than 10 rebounds. There's all sorts of different ways that you can get into the game with Prize Picks. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It is that easy. All right, Damichael. So it pains me. I know some folks in the comments were talking about how they can't cheer for Mike Conley because he plays for another team. And I struggle with that because it's Mike Conley, right? I mean, he plays for another team, but he'll be a Memphis Grizzly forever. His number will be retired by the Grizzlies, not the freaking Timberwolves down the road. But a team that it's really hard to cheer for is the Dallas Mavericks, right? Because that's a team that Memphis is going to have to contend with in the future. That is a team that has one of the best players on the planet, Luka Doncic. Maybe only Nikola Jokic, you could argue, is better than Luka at this stage. And Kyrie is probably playing some of the best basketball in a supporting role off of Luka, which makes them very dangerous in that way. And maybe you focus on that a little bit in your similarity, or for your lesson, I should say. For me, wouldn't you know, who did the Dallas Mavericks take in the first round of the draft in 2023, Damichael? Who was their first round pick?
They said fee 5 fun, Joe. They took your and they doubled down on it too.
And then to your point, you're making my point for me, which is totally cool. At the trade deadline around that time, who did they go out and acquire? Riddle me that, partner. Who did they get?
Yeah, Daniel Gafford, another big center.
Gafford.
That was your guy. You wanted him for Memphis too. I remember that.
So they go out, they acknowledge that Grant Williams was not a good signing. They find a way to bring in other bigs, right? Yeah. Gafford, Washington, lively through the draft. P.J. Washington was a huge part of that Game 7 win, right? I think he made the game-winning free throw.
Yeah.
So my lesson is find some bigs that can actually play big for you. They don't have to be traditional bigs, but in the case of Lively, he is pretty much, and so is Gafford, that type of big. And I think that one of the best comps for Lively is Clingan, Donovan Clingan, in terms of what they could physically do for the Grizzlies this season. Because people like to say a rookie cannot impact a team trying to make a championship run. I would counter that point with what Lively is doing for the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic himself in the post-game presser said, we do not win this series without D-Live. And I could very easily see Ja Morant sitting in a press conference after a question asked by you, my partner, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal. Yeah. We do not win this series without Donovan Clingan. We do not win this series without Zach Edey, hopefully not at 9. But whoever the big might be, my lesson from the Mavs, believe in fee fi fo fum.
Yeah. I can't pivot off of this one, Joe. I gotta agree with you on this one. I can't. That's the lesson. That is, I mean, let's look at the Mavs roster, right? You got your star and Luka. Grizzlies got that. They got Ja Morant. You got your supporter and Kyrie Irving. The Grizzlies got Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. They have that. And to your point a little bit earlier about the stars playing off of each other and whatnot, the Grizzlies, I think Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr., in my experience covering them, are very egoless when it comes to their roles co-starring with Ja Morant.
And Desmond Bane is phenomenal alongside Ja Morant. Not quite the same as Doncic and Irving, but it's comparable. The difference is, Ja and Jaren haven't quite found that chemistry.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's where, there's going to be some growth there. And, that's where maybe you could say, oh, look at how those two worked it out. And you can kind of use the Ja Jaren thing. But I think, the Grizzlies have figured out rotation wise, like how they, we saw it, in the couple games that they played, Dez and Jaren would be on the floor together. And then we saw Ja playing with Luke Kennard and, just certain mixes that kind of maximize what those guys do well. But I'm going to agree with you. And the angle that I'm going to take is the importance of rim protection. Because, we know that Jaren Jackson Jr. is important for what he does. But I think this is the area that when I watch the Mavs, because let's put it like this. I think when the Grizzlies move Jaren to the 5, he can protect the rim, yes. But it is not the best way to maximize the Grizzlies on the defensive end. I think there are other ways in terms of when we see the Grizzlies using Jaren as a roamer. That's where he won Defensive Player of the Year. The year before that, he pretty much led the league in blocks when he was healthy. That's when he's been at his best from a defensive activity standpoint. You want to continue to get that type of production from Jaren. I think you need that 5 who is that rim protector, kind of playing off of your point, but the rim protector angle. I think it's very important because, Jaren in the past used to talk about how having Steven Adams alongside of him was so important, to what he was able to do defensively. It's like 2 safeties in the back of a defense. You got that one safety who's a little bit more aggressive, and they're able to do that because they know that the other guys behind them is going to cover up for their mistakes and things like that. So I think that's what the Grizzlies can take from that. Yeah, they need their fee fi fo fum. They need their bigs in order to, maximize this window. I mean, look at the Mavs, right? Just the first round series. I can't get off that game where, James Harden torched him. You remember that game where he just kept getting to the floater and he just floated out the floater.
Limb from limb.
Limb for limb. And everyone after that game, the question to Jason Kidd was no Gafford, no Lively. He played Maxi Kleber, as a small ball 5, and his reasoning was, offense. And as we saw in this series, who had the highest plus minus in the whole series? It was Derek Lively.
A rookie.
And
not just a rookie, but a rookie big man.
A rookie big man. Go reel that. Go reel that, Memphis. So I'm with you, Joe. I think we saw it up close. And if anything, it should give, Memphis fans confidence that, hey, if you draft the right big man, they can come in and produce. I mean, like I said, he had the highest plus minus in the entire series. And he mentally was challenged. Like, this wasn't an easy series for Derek Lively. They did the hacker. What did they call it? The hacker Lively. On him. And I mean, I've never seen a player he was running from it. Like, it was funny for a second. He was like, please don't foul me, like running from it. And you hear Kyrie and his teammates saying, no, you ain't got to run from it. Like, embrace it. Like, this is your moment. And I'm with you. That's the angle. The big, as a Grizzlies fan, you should kind of be put at ease saying, hey, if the Mavericks can do that, and you've drafted better than Mavericks in recent years. So kind of, think about that.
And that is the key for me, because people will in the comments point out, well, Ja Morant's not Luka Doncic, two very different players. Luka can hit the three. Ja, to this point, has not proven that. But my counter to that would be Memphis has 3 all-star caliber type players, whereas Dallas might have 2 all-NBA caliber players. Who's the third best Dallas Maverick? Right? Like, is it Tim Hardaway Jr.? Is it Lively at this point?
No.
Like, who would you – I guess I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but you understand my point.
Yeah.
I think Memphis has a little bit more depth in that higher level type of player that cancels that difference out, at least for me. Like, if Memphis and the Dallas Mavericks were to go into next season, I would say at Memphis in 7. It's going to be a hell of a series. I don't think Memphis blows them out. I don't see the Mavericks going away. And one of the reasons for that is Lively. So go in, don't mess this up, Memphis Grizzlies. There's plenty of bigs. Doesn't have to be Edey or Klingon. I think you can make an argument for Ware out of Indiana. There are guys that are going to be in and around, whether you trade back, trade up, whatever the case might be.
He's Misi. I keep saying that guy's name.
Yeah, that's a good example too. Go get a true big, a guy that actually can let Jaren play that 4 and have some success. I think that is the lesson for me. Let us know what you think of your Dallas lessons in the comments. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will close out this episode trying to learn from the Indiana Pacers. I've got a good lesson. It's a little bit different.
Joe is not high on these guys.
No, I'm not. My lesson is going to be kind of passive aggressive. Spoiler alert. But we'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. First, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner take all time in the NBA as well as the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot. Yes, you, dear listener, dear viewer, to bring home a big win of your very own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Go check them out today. Again, when we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out the show, I guess we have to talk about the Indiana Pacers. We don't have to, but it's a good chance for me to, be a smart aleck. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He is an award-winning beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there, covering the Memphis Grizzlies. I have been following the Grizzlies for over a decade, most notably over at Grizzly Bear Blues when they were part of SB Nation. Between the two of us, you've come to the right place. We've gotten lots of compliments, which I really, truly do appreciate. There's lots of great content out there being created by all sorts of Grizzlies folks, but I would put Locked On Grizzlies with just about anybody in terms of the content that's out there. So it's good to know that there's an audience that agrees with that statement. We've talked about lessons from the Mavericks and the Celtics, partner. We're going to close out this episode, and I killed the lead a little bit. The Indiana Pacers are in the Eastern Conference Finals, and I'm struggling with it, in part because I've talked a lot of trash about Tyrese Halliburton, and I feel like my reverse jinx power is working too well right now. He played well in that Game 7 against the New York Knicks, but here is the lesson that I am taking from the Indiana Pacers. Sometimes, Damichael, it is better to be lucky than good. All right? So look at the injuries that the New York Knicks had to deal with over the course of that series, as well as the Bucks. Sometimes being the healthier team, sometimes being the more energetic team in terms of, Halliburton did not play the minutes. Really, nobody plays the minutes that Tom Thibodeau teams play. But whether it's OG Anunoby, whether it was Josh Hart, Julius Randle, up and
Mitchell
down the list. Mitchell Robinson.
Bogdanovich, man.
Yeah, and Jalen Brunson breaks his hand in the Game 7 there. That's just 6 names off the top of our head that directly impacted that series, and it still went 7 games. So I think that, with the draft lottery, I talked about the importance of luck in terms of health for Memphis mattering more than jumping up to the #1 pick. And if you stay healthy, things can break for you. And now the Indiana Pacers, who have a Halliburton, who is a very good basketball player for all of my passive-aggressive digs. Pascal Siakam is kind of the forgotten man after how important that trade was. He's looked really strong in these playoffs. And they're facing a Celtics team that they're going to be the underdog, but at least they have a chance to play as one of the NBA's Final Four teams. So my lesson is, if you're able to stay healthy, sometimes things break literally and figuratively the right way for you, and you have a chance to make a run, even if you shouldn't necessarily. Because again, going into next season, who is going to be picked in front of the Grizzlies? The Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Thunder, the Mavericks. Memphis, nationally at least, will be picked as a play-in team. We may not agree with that, but that is almost certainly going to be their reality. They are going to need some form of luck in the eyes of many in order to make a run like the Pacers are making right now.
Yeah, and mine is I was gonna actually, I was thinking about using that one too, Joe. But I figured, I know my co-host really well. I said Joe might lean into that.
Yeah.
The luck that this team ran into. I mean, this run reminds me of Trae Young's Eastern Conference Finals run. No, they're both really good players.
Didn't that
right?
involve the Knicks as well?
It did. He beat the Knicks.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. And that was a flawed Knicks roster. Elfrid Payton was starting, back then. Remember that?
Wild times
for sure. For me, as it pertains to the Pacers, it's more of something that's going to have to be re-emphasized for the Grizzlies, something that we've seen in the past. But I think it's a teaching that now that you're seeing other teams do it, it's a good time to re-emphasize this as we go into a pivotal offseason. Game over name. That's my thing. If you look at the Pacers, you're gonna hear two names pretty much more than you're gonna hear Pascal Siakam, you're gonna hear Tyrese Halliburton. Some people out there will say Miles Turner or whatever the case may be, but those are the two names you're gonna hear. It's a roster where, think of a guy like Vince Williams. Nationally, in Memphis, we're talking about the possibility of him starting over Marcus Smart. We as in just the people, having those conversations. This is nothing I don't think the team is talking about, but just us. Right. We're actually entertaining the idea. Nationally, people probably be like, what? Vince Williams, a guy who was on a 2-way contract at the end of the season, possibly starting off a 10-year vet? Like, what are y'all talking about? But let's get into this conversation. So if you watch the Pacers, Aaron Nesmith is in their starting lineup. If you remember Aaron Nesmith, you probably remember Aaron Nesmith because of the fact that he was drafted in front of Desmond Bane and, all of that. But if you look a little bit deeper, Aaron Nesmith played in Boston and didn't see the floor.
Correct.
Like, he was you can say he was a bust. He was a first-round bust in Boston. And, he was traded. And now he is a pivotal starter. He is the point of attack defensively for that Pacers team. And he gets to play to his strength. Andrew Nembhard. I think, Joe, that was a guy you liked in the draft at one point, if I remember correctly.
Was. You have a good memory, partner.
Yeah, I'm like, I think I remember you talking about him. But Andrew Nembhard, that's another one. He started this game 7, 20 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 8 of 10 shooting from the field. And half the people probably can't even, remember who Andrew Nembhard, was. I think he was the player that got in that situation, Ja Morant, on the floor.
He was, yes.
Yeah. When the whole laser training incident and all that stuff happened. But that was him. So you might remember him from then. But the point is, he's not a household name. That's two important starters that we just listed that, had big games. Aaron Nesmith shot 8 of 8 from the field. And Andrew Nembhard was 8 of 10. Now, granted, game 7, weird stuff's happened. But those guys have been important players for this team all season long. And there's no way you go into the season, you tell me, oh, yeah, they're going to be relying on Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith over, Benedict Mattern and names like that. And I'll say, what are you talking about? But at the end of the day, name does not go over game. Game goes over name. And that is something that I said it's going to have to be re-emphasized in Memphis because, honestly, if you were going name over game, Benedict Mattern, would probably, been starting all year long. And, he's the high first-round rookie and all that stuff. But in Memphis, as we get to this next chapter, you're going to see guys like G.G. Jackson, Vince Williams, some of these young guys kind of emerging. Then you're going to have the Marcus Smarts of the world. We'll see what happens with the center spot. Maybe they draft a rookie, a second-round rookie or something, and then they go in free agency and get a guy, and the second-round rookie is outplaying, the starting center in so many minutes. Taylor Jenkins, the front office, you're going to have the guts to make those calls where we're going to have to emphasize the game over the name because that's going to be important. Look at Vince Williams. we see the impact. We know Marcus Smart's impact as well. This is a conversation me and Joe are going to have a lot this summer, so I'm not trying to dive too much into that right now. But the point is, look at that team. You wouldn't have thought at the beginning of the year Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard would shoot a combined, 16 of 18 in a closeout game in a starting lineup with Aaron Nesmith. In New York. You wouldn't have thought that. So that just goes to show, they had other players on the bench that they could have turned to. But at the end of the day, they trusted what they have, and they went with the game over the name.
Game over the name, and that will be an interesting conversation we have about Vince Williams Jr. and Marcus Smart. And I do think if Smart is on the roster, and we've talked a little bit about that too, if Smart is on the roster, I think he's the starter. But
for sure,
who plays the most minutes? How does that role evolve? That is going to be something to keep an eye on. You are tapped in as usual, partner. Thank you guys for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I want to remind you about Locked On Sports Today, the first ever streaming channel over on YouTube. It has shows like team shows like ours here, Locked On Grizzlies. Also has other leagues and different types of teams. Locked On NBA will pop up over there. I'm sure Locked On Pacers and Locked On Celtics and Locked On Mavs with Nick Angstad, one of our bosses. I'm sure that'll be, a focus over the next couple of days, and deservedly so. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, not just on YouTube, but also on Amazon Fire under the free channels portion of the app. Next time we're together, partner, again, maybe we'll take a closer look at some of these playoff matchups, how their teams are assembled compared to how the Grizzlies figure to be assembled. We could also take a bit of a look at, I know you talked about the Donovan Mitchell trade and how, that maybe wouldn't be the most sensical thing for the Grizzlies to do. I'm with you. I think that's fair. I just like to make people mad on the internet. I think there might be another Cleveland Cavalier, though, that might be worth kind of sniffing around and seeing if they might be available. Maybe not Donovan Mitchell, but keeping with my fee, fi, fo, fum vibe, maybe that's a good hint as to where I'm going for our Tuesday episode of the show.
Yeah. That was the guy I talked about a little bit, so I think we're along the same lines here. But actually, I talked about him in the show, and then after that, there were some reports that came out, that said there's a heavy market out there for a Cleveland center. So, maybe it is something that we dive a little bit deeper
into. And it's important to point out that there's more than one Cleveland big man. And that's something to keep in mind, too.
That's very important to point out. Yeah.
Contract
years and
a lot of money is going to have to be spent. Where are they going to spend it in
regardless?
So maybe taking a look at how other teams' off seasons could impact what the Grizzlies do. That'll be a focus of our Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're checking us out on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Make us a part every single day of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption experience. Hopefully you're an everydayer. Anytime an episode drops, you are checking out Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael appreciates it, as do I. We will catch you here tomorrow. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay locked in, free and available wherever you get podcasts. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. See you next time.